Project Hail Mary is a 2021 science fiction novel written by American author Andy Weir. Andy Weir is the same author of the novel called The Martian, which was made into a critically acclaimed film by Ridley Scott in 2015 starring Matt Damon. Project Hail Mary is rated 4.5 stars out of 5 on Goodreads, a review drawn from over 511,000 reviews. And production of a film adaptation starring Ryan Gosling is set to begin in 2024. Set in the very near future, Project Hail Mary follows one man's attempts to save the world from impending global disaster. The Earth's sun is beginning to dim, and world governments put forward their best and brightest to develop drastic solutions to save the world from almost certain destruction. Author Andy Weir has stated that after the success of his book, The Martian, he began working on a space opera called Zek. He ultimately abandoned this project, but several of his ideas were carried over into what would become this novel, Project Hail Mary. As in The Martian, Andy has written a narrative centered around the lone perspective of his protagonist, a former academic turned middle school science teacher named Ryland Grace. The narrative changes back and forth between Ryland's present experiences in space and his past experiences on Earth. We learn that Ryland once wrote an academic paper that resulted in his abandonment of academe, but it turns out that his perspective is exactly what is needed for the current global crisis. Ryland is ordered to go into space by government official Ava Stratt, and when he refuses, she drugs him and sends him into orbit anyway. The mission is one way and thus suicidal, and the 2 other astronauts that accompanied him die during the journey. So Ryland Grace is hardly convincing as a realistic character, as his only thought for the future is for the survival of his students. He never once thinks or mentions his friends or family, and his cheesy one-liners lead readers to believe that we're set out to create a generic self-insert. Ryland often responds to traumatic situations with cheesy jokes, and his only character purpose seems to be to convince readers that science is cool. Science also functions as unintentional magic in this novel, as the hero is always able to remember and perfectly utilize random scientific principles without any real struggle. Fortunately, Ryland meets a much more interesting character while in space, an alien he calls Rocky, who, like our hero, is the only survivor of his own planet's space mission. Rocky and Ryland work together to identify the problem with the sun, which is that it is being consumed by a microbe called astrophage. And Ryland is the expert in that area, and the two manage to obtain a sample of its natural predator, another microbe called Tomoeba, and they breed it into larger quantities to obtain a sample and send it back home. The interactions between the two are interesting but generally full of contrivances, the most glaring of which is Ryland's ability to adeptly master Rocky's nonverbal language in a matter of weeks, and it really pulls the reader out of the book when you realize how contrived that is. Fortunately for Ryland, Rocky just so happens to have enough fuel to send Ryland back home, which means that this suicide mission actually now has hope of becoming a return mission home. But unfortunately, Ryland realizes too late that Rocky's ship is actually in danger, and so he chooses to return back to Rocky, and he sacrifices his only opportunity to return home back to Earth, although he does manage to send out some of the samples that he obtained in space. Rocky's planet is close enough, however, so Ryland lands on this planet and now creates it his home, where he becomes a science teacher to the alien children. Weir is patient with readers. One of the good things about this novel is that he attempts to explain more complex scientific principles in layman's terms, but unfortunately, in my opinion, the hype of the novel seems very overblown. There are no real stakes to the story and no character arcs, as each person is exactly the same at the end of the story as they were from the beginning. Ryland is always 100% selfless, Rocky is always 100% curious, and Strat is always 100% utilitarian. Andy Weir uses this ghost in the machine narrative device so many times that all potential sense of dread is lost and the story becomes predictable, the result of which is a book that feels more like propaganda for a scientism view of the actual world than a compelling science fiction narrative. In conclusion, the science in the book is too forgiving and therefore not convincing as scientifically plausible, while the fiction of the book is too formulaic to hold interest. I give Project Hail Mary 2 stars out of 5.